The 1970s was a completely different culture, and things that were supposed to make us laugh on TV is viewed today very differently. We are going to look back at some old TV shows that can make you cringe in 2026. Some are totally obvious, yet some are quite obscure. And some, even by today's standards, still ridiculous as to why they've been deemed unacceptable today. But for most of us, we will agree that the culture change is for the best. You see, even though we saw the 1970s as a progressive decade, being more accepted in cultural change, there was clearly more to be done. So let's have a look at those shows that we deemed funny back then, yet not anymore. And I wonder if you think, how the hell did they get away with that? Or maybe you think, no harm done. Many of these programs can still be streamed, but do come with warnings and have been edited as not to offend. So, let's get on with it. Number 1, Rising Damp, a comedy show back in 1974 starring Leonard Rossiter, Francis de la Tour, Richard Beckinsale and Don Warrington. The story is about a stingy landlord, Rupert Rigsby, who rents out rooms in the very house that he lives in. In the first episode, a black tenant moves in by the name of Philip Smith, who shares a room with Alan Moore. The main joke, if you could call it that, was the mockery of Philip from Rigsby about his African culture and his customs. But that was not the whole story. There were many other stories within the series. But let's look at the characters. Miss Jones, a lonely old spinster, well, not old, but a lonely spinster, unable to find a relationship and lacks confidence and wouldn't turn anybody down. Rigsby himself, the landlord, socially inept, lacks any real sophistication or class but tries too hard and fails. Then there's Alan, who remains wet behind the ears throughout the whole series and often heeding Philip's advice. However, very up to date when it comes to acceptance. Philip's character is well-mannered, well-spoken, and often has the upper hand of all the people in the old rotting house, proving to be the best all-rounder in class and poise. Racist comments in the show are often overshadowed by Philip's sophistication and made a fool of landlord Rigsby, which made audiences less uncomfortable about watching the show. The next one up is Mind Your Language. Around 1978, a comedy series was set in an adult evening class for foreign students who wanted to improve their English. The course, English as a Foreign Language, was led by teacher Jeremy Brown, played by actor Barry Evans, and was oversaw by the head, Miss, not Mrs., Dolores Courtney, played by Zara Nutley. A bit of a battle axe who intimated that because the students had poor English that they were actually just stupid. The comedy series wasn't so much about English people making cultural or racist jokes. It was student against students making comments of other class members. Indian members bringing in machetes to attack other Asian cultures and religions. Chinese student Chung Su Lee reciting Chairman Mao in a Little Red Book, much to the distaste of others. There was some, let's say, stereotyping of races, but the icing on the cake was the typical French attractive female student Danielle Favre, who had a crush on the teacher but more or less threw herself at anybody that walked the streets. Quite opposite to the German-style, disciplined Anna Schmidt, who was opposed to any intimacy before marriage. The show showed students' lack of general knowledge more than their lack of English skills, making them look stupid rather than them struggling with the English language mainly. Now, Love Thy Neighbour, created in the early 1970s and will never be seen on TV today. The show was a comedic look at two couples living next door to each other. It was a very different slant on the old cliché keeping up with the Joneses, but there was a twist. One couple was white and the other black. Eddie Booth, a white staunch Labour Party enthusiastic and a union man, set out to undermine his next-door neighbour, Rudolph Walker. Although their wives got on very well and thought the rivalry between their husbands was just like kids fighting over toys. The language totally unacceptable, takes over the whole show and plots to make a fool of Eddie, and was always successful, giving Rudolph, the black guy, the upper hand. Later on in years, the actor Bill Reynolds wrote in The Guardian, "It is just a show about a black and white guy just being stupid." That was his quote. Next up is Are You Being Served?, a comedy show set in a large London department store. This was a worldwide hit, but it almost never got off the ground. Why? Because the BBC just didn't like it. But owing to a terrorist incident that halted the Olympic Games in 1972, the BBC had to grab a programme from its archives very quickly to fill the airtime gap. Are You Being Served? Happened to be the selection. Written by famous comedy writers Jeremy Lloyd and David Croft, but it was not destined to be a series, but eventually the BBC decided to press on with the series, but wanted John Inman's character, Wilberforce Claiborne Humphreys, out because it was too feminine. But the writers demanded that he stayed, and he became to be the most popular character in the show. But who else did we get in that show? A failed army veteran that never got past corporal, frustrated middle-aged woman, a sex-starved skint junior, amongst many other characters played by fantastic actors, really. And it became one of BBC's top-performing for viewers comedy series ever. But what do people think of the show today? Whilst many hold a nostalgic view of the show, critics may say that the stereotypical view of a gay man, but by the way, according to the writers, was never portrayed as a gay character, only as a mummy's boy. But the gay character, as perceived, showed a bad view of gay men being all effeminate and outrageous, and it was in bad taste. Then there was the seductive scene of a predatory Captain Peacock. Sexist remarks often seen as poor taste by some critics. Those great actors though, Molly Sugden, Frank Thornton, Wendy Richard, Trevor Bannister, and many more. Who was your favourite? Do you still find it funny today? The next one up is the Benny Hill Show, again in the early 1970s. Benny Hill, a fan of Ernie who drove the fastest milk cart in the West, had his show. It was a sketch comedy series mainly, consisting of himself and an old little bald man called Jackie Wright and lots of scantily clad, attractive women. Today's critics see the show as too sexualised and demeaning to women, who were always the brunt of innuendo and made objects of, particularly in the chase at the end of each episode. It was viewed by millions, who at the time voted the music of that chase the best on TV at the time. Do you think we've improved on that? Right, I'm just going to jump to the 1990s, and I've never heard of this comedy, but I had a little look at it, and it's called Heil, or Heil, Honey, I'm Home. And it featured characters Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun, who moved in next door to a Jewish couple. I don't think I even want to delve into it. I just think it's wrong in any possible way. And even at the time, people must have listened because it was taken off after one episode. We're surprised. Till Death Do Us Part began in the 1970s again, starring Warren Mitchell and Dandy Nichols. The main character, Alf Garnett, was basically an older man who sat in his chair, doing a lot of shouting really. But it was what he complained about that makes it so controversial today. Racist, bigoted, everythingist, politically motivated events, all the time about social and cultural issues with no tolerance for anything. However, all the characters in the show made him look a fool who had, let's say, more modern and accepting views of society and used to correct him, which was the main butt of the jokes and humour. As the character Alf aged, a home help was hired by the name of Winston, who Alf called Marigold, who was a rather camp black character with excellent wit, which led to banter and slurs between the characters. In time, a warm affection grew in between these two characters, but not without the continual banter. The language and attitude of the main character was no way going to be in any shows of today's standards. Many say it was the language and attitude of many at the time, whilst others would say that Alf Garnett never had the upper hand and was always being brought down by his bigotry. And that was the main aim of the show, and it made it more acceptable to watch. I hope I've made that clear. Anyway, next up is It Ain't Half Hot Mon between 1974 and 1981. It had many stars that were familiar with in the 1970s. The comedy series was an army setting, was based in India, who were there to entertain the soldiers who were on the fighting front. The concert party, according to their Sergeant Major Shutup, played by Windsor Davis, announced his masculinity by making fools of the men, by trying to make what he called men out of them through insults, and of their own lack of what he thought was manliness. Mainly making fun of the small guy, Gunnar Sugden, choosing his weaknesses and other characters too, to mock them, and it was the main part of the script. But that was not the main controversy. It was the actor Michael Bates who played Ranji Ram, who was coloured his skin and put on an Indian accent, and people find that offensive today, although Bates was actually born in India and spoke pure Urdu. But this does not sway the critics today. Although it was obvious that the party did not want to join the fighting front and did their best to keep the concert going, the truth was the officers themselves did not want to go to the front either. Again, the main butt of the jokes of the Sergeant Major was the belittling of the men because he had no talent himself, and they always outsmarted him by their intelligence and wit. Although kicking the poor fellow with the tan who fanned the officers, that wasn't very nice. The show now is deemed as racist and demeaning and has been taken off the air, but it can be viewed on certain platforms. Many comedies of that era would also include On the Buses, which would not be made today. This example of men luring over women and making unwanted advances considered demeaning and disrespectful to females. When you look at it, it's about two lads who have not really grown up and continue to use schoolboy tactics of the time to get the ladies' attention without much success, while still living at home and trying to outsmart the Inspector Blakey, played by Stephen Lewis. Condescending would be the word. Most scenes were set in the canteen, and they rarely had outside scenes. You never hardly saw them on the buses, apart from the movies. Now, before I leave, I just need to jump forward again and mention a kids' program called the Teletubbies. Did you ever think that narrator's voice sounded like Tony Blair? The program is now considered unworthy, and the controversy of today's critics includes the babbling considered to be bad learning for young viewers, which would hinder their language and development skills. Certain sketches and background music are now thought to be too scary, and there was a 1999 debate over the character Tinky Winky, who was perceived to be promoting homosexuality. That was because he had a purple triangular antenna and he carried a purse. What do you think about that? It has to be said, though, it was all a different age and era, and even though many would agree that these programs do carry offence and outdated, unacceptable phrases and characters, some would argue, if you don't like it, don't watch it. But we have to agree that today is a better time for integration, diversity and inclusion. Others may say, can't even tell a joke anymore. What do you think? Anyway, thanks for looking in again.